So Colombia has been in a deeply rooted civil war for over 40 years. There are three main actors in the conflict. There's the military, the paramilitary, and the guerrillas. The military and the paramilitaries, or armed civilians as they're also known, are essentially the same. The paramilitaries do the dirty work for the military. They terrorize people through threats, murders, and massacres and force them off their land so that the government can control the land and sell it off to private enterprise. They squash any resistance and work to eliminate unions and other social organizations, including teachers, indigenous, and religious leaders. They're responsible for roughly 75 to 80% of the human rights abuses in the country.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and welcome everybody to Community Action for Justice in the Americas, U.S. War in Colombia, and it's about repression and resistance. And for those of you who are new to CAHA, we meet in Jeanette Rankin Peace Center on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. and it's open to the public. It's every night except when we have special events like this one. And you enter through the back alley, and that's 519 Higgins at 7. So we want to start out with just a few announcements, and the first being today is the 513th anniversary of Columbus Day. And here at CAHA, we like to look at this as the indigenous people discovering Columbus instead of the reverse. So when I was thinking about this day, I was in Nicaragua this summer, and we met with an indigenous community on the Atlantic coast. And we were talking to them about Columbus Day and what it meant to them, and they said they refer to it as the last day of dignity. So I think we should just keep that in the back of our minds during this presentation because it is very relevant to it. And then our last event is going to be November 16th that we have planned for the near future. And that's going to be a funeral procession through downtown. And this is from noon to 1. It'll start at the Higgins Excess and it will end at Congressman Rieberg's office. And this is going to be to protest and demand the closing of the School of the Americas. This is basically a terrorist training camp in the United States. It's in Fort Bennings, Georgia. And they train soldiers in torture techniques and assassination-style killings. And then they go back to Latin America and carry these out. So we are demanding the closing of this. Also, we're going to be passing around our Coca-Cola clipboard. So if you haven't signed this petition yet, please do so. We're trying to get rid of the contract here at the university because we don't believe a university should be corporate. So now we're going to start the presentation, and Scott Nicholson is up first.
Thank you again all very much for being here this evening. Our work is to put a human face on U.S. policy in Colombia, and unfortunately, we're now able to do a much better job of that than we would care for. Luciano Romero embodies many of the aspects of the struggle for social justice in Colombia, and he also represents what draws me to do this work. He worked at the Nestle plant in Valledupar for 20 years, and he was dismissed from that plant in October of 2002 because of his union activity. He was a member of the Human Rights Committee of Sinal-Trinal, the National Food Industry Workers Union there in Colombia that represents the Coca-Cola and the Nestle workers. I met him at the Sinal-Trinal office in Bogota in June of 2002. We shared a room together there that evening. When I got there, he had his radio on, he was listening to the news, but he took time to talk to me, and he told me about the repression against the Nestle union members, and that 7 union members had been killed. I saw him again in May of 2003, and that time he accompanied me. We went together to the U.S. Embassy to meet with the human rights officers there. He told me that the situation was very difficult for his wife, Ledis, and that she was urging him to resign from the union. He also said that the right-wing paramilitaries had complete information about the union leadership and that he was on their list of people to be killed. Valledupar, the city that he's from, is completely controlled by the right-wing paramilitaries, which are supported by the Colombian military and police. And after he was dismissed from Nestle, he resorted to driving a cab to provide for Ledis and their three daughters. Luciano was last seen alive at 9 p.m. on September 10th. And the following morning, his body was found. His hands and feet had been tied, and he'd been stabbed 40 times. He was definitely killed by the right-wing paramilitaries. Given that our government, or the U.S. government, funds the Colombian military, which supports the paramilitaries, Luciano was essentially murdered by our tax dollars. And there are three men from here in Montana that share in the responsibility for Luciano's murder. It's Representative Rehberg, Senator Baucus, and Senator Burns for their support of military aid to Colombia. So I've got a few requests for you this evening. The first is please don't tell Vice President Duringer or President Dennison about what a horrible company Nestle is. After having signed exclusive contracts with Coca-Cola and Nike, I'm sure if they found out that Nestle's human rights record was just as bad or worse, they would want to sign for sure an exclusive contract with Nestle. So please keep that information from them. The other thing is that we're dedicating this presentation to Luciano, and we ask you to honor his memory by doing everything you possibly can to halt U.S. military aid to Colombia. And third, there's a tradition in Colombia of calling out the name of a person who has died and responding presente, presente, presente to indicate that that person is still with us in the struggle for social justice. So I'd like to ask all of you to please join me. Luciano Romero, presente, presente, presente. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Can everyone hear me in the back? All right. So from May 28th to June 11th, Jessica Letke and I joined Scott Nicholson for a 2-week delegation in Colombia. We were there as human rights observers and provided accompaniment for social leaders whose lives are threatened simply because they're organizing for a dignified life. Tonight, we want to provide you with an overview of the U.S. intervention in Colombia, share our stories, and provide you with actions that you can take to help change our failed policies. As you can see, Colombia is an absolutely beautiful country. It's rich in biodiversity and culture. These are some of the joropo dancers in the northeastern part of the country, Arauca, which is one of the places that we got to visit. So what's the problem? The problem is that it's not just a war on drugs or a war on terror. The problem is that the U.S. military intervenes in Colombia to ensure corporations' access to natural resources and cheap labor. And it's that Colombia has a regional economy that maximizes corporate profit by focusing on the manufactured desires of North American consumers rather than the basic needs of the people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Colombia is extremely rich in natural resources. It has biodiversity, water, and culture. But among its resources are oil, gold, natural gas, and coal. Colombia is the 8th largest supplier to oil in the U.S. And one of these major companies that operates in Colombia is Occidental Oil. It's known as Oxy in Colombia. It's a California-based corporation, and it owns the Caño Limón oil field in the northeastern part of Colombia, which produces 100,000 barrels of oil a day, and it has a 1 billion barrel oil reserve. So they operate the Caño Limón Coveñas pipeline, which is 480 miles long, and it carries about 820,000 barrels of oil a day. So when Plan Colombia came up for debate in 2002, Oxy was right there. They spent $350,000 lobbying in Congress in support of Plan Colombia. Lawrence P. Mariage, Occidental's public affairs vice president, testified in the House in support of this plan, and this is what he said. This is a subject of paramount importance to my company, Occidental Petroleum, and one that I believe should be at the forefront of America's foreign policy agenda. I would urge you to consider support of counter-narcotics operations in the northern regions as well as the south. This will help augment security for oil development operations, which, as noted earlier, are fundamental to the success of Plan Colombia. And in 2002, Congress approved $98 million to protect Occidental Oil's pipeline. But some people in Colombia don't want Oxy there. In 1998, the Uwa indigenous people threatened mass suicide if Oxy drilled for oil on their land. And in 2000, 3 indigenous children were killed in a military breakup of an oil blockade. Despite an abundance of natural resources, 64% of Colombians live in poverty. That's about $112 a month that they're earning. 31% of them live in extreme poverty, which means they don't even have enough income to satisfy their basic food needs. They earn about $43 a month. And it's usually the case that those hardest hit are the indigenous and Afro-Colombian populations, like these Guahibo girls that are pictured here. The minimum wage is $167 a month, and the sales tax in Colombia is 16%. About 40% of the budget goes to service the debt, which means that money is used to pay off loans instead of servicing the needs of the people. So Colombia has been in a deeply rooted civil war for over 40 years. There are 3 main actors in the conflict. There's the military, the paramilitary, and the guerrillas. The military and the paramilitaries, or armed civilians as they're also known, are essentially the same. The paramilitaries do the dirty work for the military. They terrorize people through threats, murders, and massacres and force them off their land so that the government can control the land and sell it off to private enterprise. They squash any resistance and work to eliminate unions and other social organizations, including teachers, indigenous, and religious leaders. They're responsible for roughly 75 to 80% of the human rights abuses in the country. The other warring faction are the guerrillas. And the guerrillas are known for using extortion and kidnapping to raise funds to continue funding them. And they use indiscriminate weapons like these things called cilindros, which are basically an old propane tank that they will fill up with pieces of shrapnel and launch off. And they're not super precise where they might hit, so they often kill civilians. And the guerrillas are responsible for 20 to 25% of the human rights abuses in the country. And you'll notice that throughout our presentation, we'll be focusing our criticism on the Colombian military. And that's because the people that we met with in Colombia are most concerned about the military. Also, the military supports the paramilitaries, which are responsible for the vast majority of human rights abuses in the country. And finally, our government funds the military, and therefore is supporting the paramilitary violence. In 2000, President Clinton passed Plan Colombia under the guise of the war on drugs. He's pictured here with then Colombian President Pastrana, where he spent 8 hours in Cartagena, Colombia, which is a lovely little tourist town. Pictured on the right is President Bush with the current president of Colombia, Uribe. And since Bush took office, the war on drugs has been shifted to a war on terror. Since 2000, $3.2 billion has been spent on military aid to Colombia. Another $590 million is slated for 2006. And 1.2 million acres of land have been fumigated. Yet none of this has proven successful in achieving the plan's stated goals of providing real socioeconomic development, alternatives for Colombian farmers, strengthening democracy in Colombia, or decreasing drug consumption in the United States. If only we could do that. So what are we spending all that money on? Where has that $3.2 billion gone? This banner reads, Plan Colombia. The U.S. provides the weapons, Colombia provides the dead. For starters, we spent money, $234 million on 18 Black Hawk helicopters from United Technologies. We spent $81 million on 42 Huey helicopters from Textron. Monsanto, you've probably heard of Monsanto there. They provide glyphosate, or Roundup, the weed killer that is used to carry out the fumigations. and DynCorp. They are a company of mercenaries that has the State Department contract for all aerial fumigations in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, and Pakistan. They earn $170 million a year to do this. So what's our vision then? What do we want to see instead of this? Our vision is pretty simple, that everyone has enough food to eat, dignified housing, access to health care and education, and enjoys a healthy environment. But how do we get this? We need to prioritize funding for health, education, and housing instead of funding the military. And we need to create an economic system that's controlled by communities, not by corporations. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Can you guys hear me back there? Yes? Okay. Like Erin said, my name is Jessica, and this was my first trip to Colombia. Unlike most of the people I was traveling with, had been there several times. And I knew there was going to be a major emotional change for me, and it would be life-altering. But what I didn't know when I got on that airplane was the level of fear and hope that I would feel all at the same time once I got there from the people of Colombia. This here is a map of Colombia. You kind of orient yourself as to where we were. And when we got to Colombia, we had a pretty tight schedule. They pretty much had us running from meeting to meeting, from denunciation to denunciation, from dusk to dawn for 15 days. And when we got to Barranca Bermeja, we met with Miguel Cifuentes, who some of you may remember, who was here a few years back. He's of the Scimitar River Valley Peasant Association. And he informed us that he was going to change our plans a little bit, which was, again, was not unusual for our trip. But he informed us that there had been some pretty scary military activity in the towns of Puerto Matilde and Alto Santo Domingo about a week and a half before we arrived. And he wanted us to go check it out and to show our white faces, basically. This picture here is a picture of Puerto Matilde. And what you see is a housing project the community started. Each of these homes, a little close-up of them, houses 2 families. The communities have built 30 homes there with the funding mostly of private organizations, mainly European. Certainly none of the funding from this has come from Plan Colombia or the United States government. But this is an example of the housing. And we were in Puerto Matilde. We were hearing reports of what was going on in a neighboring town of Alto Santo Domingo. A few days before we arrived, 300 military had marched into the town, Puerto Matilde, and beyond it into Santo Domingo. With these 300 paramilitary were 50 known paramilitaries. When I say known, they were known by community members. They either recognized them as people they knew, because these are very small communities, or they had seen them at blockades that the paramilitaries have along the rivers, and they'd seen them with paramilitary armbands. Then a few days or a week later, they see them with military uniforms marching up to Santo Domingo. So the community was pretty concerned. And the reports that were coming down from Santo Domingo were that the military that had gone there were putting hoods on, going into people's homes in the middle of the night, pulling them out, husbands, wives, children, grandparents, lining them up against a wall, pointing semi-automatic weapons at them, threatening them, asking for their names, for their any numbers, who they communicated with, who their friends were, if they were guerrilla. Basically scaring the ever-loving shit out of these people and letting them go back to bed. And just they were supposed to go to sleep and go on their merry ways. And this is the report that was coming down and what Miguel wanted us to check out. And the community of Santo Domingo had asked that we come there and talk to the military. So we all hopped on mules. This is us stopping on the way. We were accompanied by a few Colombians. They provided the instructions for how to ride a mule, and we provided them with 4 hours of entertainment. We had no idea what we were doing. But it was a beautiful trip. We went through the rainforest. It was gorgeous. And when we got to Santo Domingo, this is the town. So you can see it's pretty small, and there are 300 military there. You can see the military lingering around. This is the community center they're pictured in front of. See the large weaponry that they have. Hung around that center field there was kind of the soccer field. They had shut the school down, taken the key, and were using that to store their weapons so the kids weren't in school. They had taken over people's homes, made themselves comfortable. And so that evening, we met with Cesar, who was the president of the community association there, or pretty much the essential equivalent of our mayor. And he informed us of his concerns of safety. And he felt that the military was coming in and taking over this town, using their homes, and using the people and the children as human shields so that the guerrillas who were lingering in the area would not fire upon the military because they may hit the children. As Erin said earlier, some of the guerrillas' weapons aren't very accurate. So they felt as they were being used as human shields. And also the military had told the town that they were planning to build a base there, which the community, understanding that it's the Colombian military and they can build a base where they wish, but they were asking that it not be built right in the center of this town. So Cesar asked us to meet with the commander of the military of the region and express our concerns of the violations of international law and to express the community's concerns for their safety. But before we met with the military, we had a community meeting where several people from farms around the Alto Santo Domingo came in and expressed similar concerns that Cesar had expressed to us the night before. But the main topic of conversation was how are they, or should they stay, should they go, what should they do? And I was sitting there listening to this and thinking about my own self and what it would take for me to leave behind my house, my friends, the land that had been in my family for generations, everything I knew, and pack up what would fit on my back and leave. It's not like Colombia has a great job market. You aren't going to go get a job somewhere. There's an abundant housing. You were leaving everything and basically and honestly risking starving yourself and your children and hoping that someone took you in along the way. I'd have to be pretty scared to do that. And to be honest with you, my time in Santo Domingo, I was pretty scared and I was pretty intimidated, especially when this guy came along and started taking our pictures. And then Major Gonzalez, who is the major of the region, quickly informed us that we need to put our cameras away, as Scott is doing here ever so reluctantly. And he also informed us that they were the force there, if we hadn't figured that out by the heavy artillery we were surrounded with. So we gave them their passports, we gave them our letters of safe passage from our congressman, and the situation started to tone down a little bit, voices began to lower, and we sat down with Major Gonzalez and expressed our concerns of the community, that they felt for their safety, and his response was that they were there to protect the people. And obviously the people did not feel very protected if they were leaving. We also explained to him that what he was doing by using these people as human shields and taking over their homes was a violation of the 1998 Rome Statute of International Criminal Court by the UN. Article 8, Section B, number 23. He told us he knew nothing of international law, and being a major and having that much rank in an army, I find it extremely hard to believe, but whatever. That's what he told us. And so then we also expressed our concerns that there were paramilitaries in the region, and he said there are none here now. That is correct. According to the community, they had all left 2 days before. One of them actually by helicopter. So there were none there now. So we expressed our nice diplomatic, we will be in contact with this community and they better be safe. He said, have a nice ride home. And we left. Since we left Santo Domingo, 58 families have left. You saw the picture, it's not very big. It's majority of the people have left the region and are now displaced. And I wondered why all of a sudden was this military so concerned with this town, essentially in the middle of nowhere. There's your answer. AngloGold Ashanti is the second largest gold producer in the world, and they have requested from the Colombian government, and the Colombian government is looking as if they're going to grant them 3.2 million acres to mine for gold, part of which is the lovely town of Alto Santo Domingo. We all know you can't gold for mine with the community there, so the military has come to get them out. Then you ask, where do these people go once they're displaced and leave the towns of Santo Domingo and other regions of Colombia? And they go to places like this, Ciudad Bolivar. This is a very small section of it. This is a region called Cazuca that we visited when we were there. It's basically a displacement community or slum on the hillsides that goes on for miles and miles and miles of all the cities of Colombia. There's no running water, there's no sewer system, there's no schools, there's no health care. But this woman here was actually, it's her and her family, and they live in this home, which is actually one of the nicer ones we saw. And she is a volunteer teacher, and she works with the mentally ill and the physically disabled there in the region, and is doing a fabulous job. So there are little rays of hope like that you see too. Another problem, an issue that's going on in Colombia is the indigenous. And we met with the Cancuamo. This is mountain range here. It's the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, where these people are from. And they met with us one of the first days that we were there in Bogota at the Senal Trenal office. And they explained to us that the Cancuamo and many other indigenous peoples of Colombia, same thing's happening to them that's been happening in Alto Santo Domingo. They're being kicked out of their land. Paramilitary is coming over. But unfortunately for the indigenous people, the paramilitary is not just pulling them out of their beds at night and letting them go back to bed, they're killing them. There were 13,000 Cancuamo tribal members within 12 villages. One of those villages is completely gone, annihilated. 238 indigenous Cancuamo have been murdered. 90% of these murders were done by the paramilitaries, which they killed them and then presented them to the government as guerrillas killed in combat. These people weren't guerrillas, they were civilians. Cancuamo, very similar to the indigenous and native tribes we have here in the States, are very connected to the land. It's a lot of their culture, it's very sacred to them. And when you take them off that land and when you destroy their sacred places, you also destroy their culture. 19 leaders and 50 families, about approximately 5 people per family, are now living in Bogota. So you've taken them from their sacred ground, those that have survived, and you put them in a shanty town like I just showed you a few minutes ago. And this gentleman here was explaining to us that on March 5th, 2003, he was actually brutally attacked by the paramilitaries and left for dead, which is when he decided to flee and go to Bogota. And he told us, to quote again, "The sacred sites are corrupted, and they have killed the mamos, the old wise ones who are like a library for us. We did not come here to spill blood on the land. That hurts the earth. When they kill the mamos, it's like burning a library for you. That destroys our culture. They did not fumigate the large plantations. They fumigate our small places where the sacred plants grow. This has caused the disappearance of 15 sacred plants. Displacement has become a business. The government says that no one is displaced by fumigations, but when your food crops are destroyed, you have to go elsewhere. Mothers are giving birth, and animals too, to babies who are disfigured because of the fumigations." After seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard for 2 weeks, I'd have to agree with the Cancuamo. Displacement is a business. It's not a result of the violence in Colombia and the paramilitary and the militaries. It is their goal. Make no mistake about it. They want to privatize and get people off the land so corporations like AngloGold Ashanti can come in and make us all some nice gold jewelry. I'm going to now turn it over to Erin.
So I'm going to talk a little more specifically about the fumigations that we've kind of mentioned. In 2000, U.S. Congress passed Plan Colombia. Initially, the $1.3 billion package was passed as a counter-narcotics plan. Its goals were to support the Colombian government's efforts to strengthen democracy, promote respect for human rights and the rule of law, foster socioeconomic development, and reduce coca cultivation in Colombia. Today, with nearly 90% of all cocaine and 50% of all heroin entering the U.S. from Colombia, leaders in Congress have argued that the U.S. will only be able to address its own drug abuse problem by fighting drugs at their source. All indicators taken into account, there's still no evidence to prove that this policy has moved us towards any reduction in cocaine on U.S. streets. One of the primary elements of this plan is fumigation. And from December 2000 to December 2004, 1.2 million acres have been sprayed. This year, a record 341,000 acres of coca was sprayed, and according to the U.S. drug czar, John Walters, coca cultivation was at 305,000 acres at the end of 1999 and at 285,000 acres at the end of 2004. And this is what he said: "Cocaine on America's streets continues to be as pure, available, and affordable as it was before fumigations began." The amount of coca cultivated at the end of 2004 after the fumigations is enough to produce 430 metric tons of cocaine. U.S. consumption is only 250 to 300 metric tons. And that doesn't even include all of the other cocaine entering from other places besides Colombia. That's just the Colombian. So there's a lot of other cocaine coming from the Andean region. The RAND Corporation, which is a conservative think tank, estimates that drug treatment at home is 23 times more effective than fighting drugs at the source. In June 2000, when Plan Colombia was being debated, the late Senator Paul Wellstone offered an amendment to cut $225 million from military aid to Colombia and move it into domestic drug treatment programs. That amendment failed. And guess what? Senators Baucus and Burns both voted against that. Little tribute to Wellstone here. Thank you. So 18,000 people die each year from drug use in the U.S., legal and illegal. And 440,000 people die from tobacco. But I don't hear the State Department suggesting that we go fumigate the South. I'm just going to show this for a second here. Fumigation is incredibly harmful to humans, animals, and the environment. That photo and this photo here is a photo of a man who has been fumigated, and we met him in Barranca Bermeja. His name is Penfigo. He was in his field in the southern part of Bolivar on August 2nd, 2004, when the planes came by and sprayed him. We were visiting him on June 10th, almost 1 year later, and this is what he looked like. He said he'd been hit before and he was recovering when the planes came by and hit him again. Now he's used every penny that he has, all his resources from his family, to go to doctors and be examined. And he's living on the floor of this office in Barranca Bermeja now. This is at the Displaced Persons Association. This is where he lives. In the picture is his daughter there and his granddaughter. And she stays with him and takes care of him and feeds him and is doing all that she can for him. They've taken him to the doctor, and the doctor says that there's nothing they can do because there's nothing wrong with him, and it's not the chemicals that did this. They know that the chemicals used are safe, so it couldn't be that. But his daughter argued that point in saying that she knows that those chemicals are poisonous. And the same day that Penfigo was hit, 2 other people were hit in the field as well, but much harder. One was an 11-year-old boy, and he died 8 days after the spraying. Another young boy died 15 days later. So what's the goal of the fumigations then? It's not stopping drug use, and it's hurting people. It does provide a great business for Monsanto and DynCorp, so keep that in mind. but it does achieve its real goal, which Jess mentioned, to displace people from their lands in order to sell that land off to private enterprise. I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
So the sound is okay there? We're okay with the sound with the mic here? You can hear in back? That's okay? Well, I thought after all that it might be a good idea, just for briefly anyway, to kind of lighten things up for a moment. And I stopped off in Los Angeles on my way to Colombia to visit my mom and sister. And evidently the crime problem there in Los Angeles has gotten way out of hand, because went for a walk one afternoon up to Rolling Hills and found out that the people there have resorted to using armed security companies to protect their porta potties. So getting a little bit serious once again here. When we were during the delegation in our time in Adarauca in northeastern Colombia, we visited the town of Taime. And that town has been completely taken over by the paramilitaries. And in the first 5 months of this year, there were 86 people that were killed there in Taime. So we went to the town of Taime. As far as I know, we were the first Human Rights Commission to visit Taime since the paramilitaries took it over a few years ago. So we had a meeting there in the municipal offices. It was a large public meeting. Members of the local government spoke. And we opened it up to hear testimonies from the people there as well, but people were fairly reluctant to speak in a public meeting like that. Although this one city council person got up and spoke very eloquently, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later. So then what we did is we set up 2 rooms to be able to receive people's testimony in private. And this is Rosa, and she told us that on April 30th of this year, the 2 paramilitaries came to the house of her son, Oscar. They came there, they started questioning Oscar, and then he, after being questioned, or while he was being questioned by them, he tried to run away. And they opened fire and shot and killed him in front of his 2 children. And this is his 3-year-old daughter, and as Rosa was talking to us about what had happened to Oscar, the little girl touched her chest and said, "The bullet came out here." This is Sandra. On May 19th of last year, there in the town of Taime, a police patrol passed by she and her spouse. A few minutes later, the paramilitaries arrived there, forced her spouse into a taxi, drove him away, shot and killed him. The funeral home there in Taime, which just so happens to be owned by the paramilitaries, arrived at the scene of the killing less than 15 minutes later. Actually, the funeral home got there before the police did. And Sandra said that she's been followed by the paramilitaries and that she fears for her life. And it's very difficult for her to provide for their 2 children, who are 6 and 8 years old, because of the lack of work in Taime. And she said the hardest times are when the children are sick, and she doesn't know how she can get the resources to take care of them. So this is the gentleman that spoke earlier in that public meeting. And afterwards, he and some other folks came up to us, and so they wanted to have a private meeting. So we met with them in private towards the end of the day, and they talked about what had happened to Jaime Droeto, and he'd been the leader of a petition drive to recall the mayor there in Taime because of the mayor's close relations with the paramilitaries and also because of his corruption. In just 3 weeks, they gathered all the signatures that they needed to be able to put that recall petition on the ballot. And then on January 28th, Jaime publicly denounced the mayor of Taime in a public meeting with the national director of the DAS, the security police there in Colombia. And afterwards, Jaime told his friends that what he had said could cost him his life. The next day, January 29th, 6 of them were having a meeting in one of their houses talking about the petition drive. A man came into the house, drew a gun, and shot and killed Jaime in front of the other men. They were going to be handing in those petitions 2 days later, but after Jaime's death, that ended the recall campaign. And after the delegation, I was able to spend another 2.5 months there in Colombia. And the last month I was back in Adarauca in northeastern Colombia. And this is a monument in the town of Caño Seco that was unveiled on August 5th of this year. It's in memory of Alirio Martinez, who was the president of the Departmental Peasant Association, Jorge Prieto, who is the president of the Hospital Workers Union there in Adrauca, and Leonel Goyeneche, who was a teacher. He was the educational coordinator for the Saravena Adult Vocational High School, and also the treasurer of the United Workers Federation. And the monument reads, "Leaders of the social organizations in Adrauca killed on this spot by the National Army on August 5th, 2004. And 1 year prior to that, on August 21st of 2003, the police and military captured 37 social leaders in the town of Saravena and then transferred them to Bogota, where they were imprisoned on charges of being collaborators or members of the guerrillas. And that day, Alirio, Jorge, and Leonel managed to escape arrest, and so they went into hiding, but they continued their leadership in the social movement. There was a meeting of the social leaders in this community of Caño Seco on August 4th, and Alirio and Leonel stayed that evening in Jorge's house. The next morning, the military came into Caño Seco, and 3 soldiers and a civilian informant went to Jorge's house, dragged the 3 men out of their beds, took them outside, and as is illustrated here, knelt them down and executed them. That afternoon, Vice President Santos and Defense Minister Uribe said that these 3 men were actually guerrillas who had been fleeing from the soldiers, that they had fired on the soldiers, and the soldiers then fired back, killing them. This is Jorge's house, and this is where the monument was unveiled that day. So this is the exact spot where the 3 men were killed. This is Samuel Morales. He's a teacher, a president of the United Workers Federation there in Adrauca. He participated in that meeting in Caño Seco on August 4th and spent the night there in the community, but in another house. And that next day, after the 3 men were killed, Samuel was taken by the military and then transferred to the El Modelo prison in Bogota on charges of rebellion. And I visited him in the prison there on June 11th, the same day the delegation came back here to the States. And Samuel walked me through kind of what happened on the morning of August 5th. He said that he got up at 5:30 that morning, and there were soldiers all over the community. He estimated there were about 80 to 100 soldiers there in Caño Seco. At 5:45, he heard shots being fired from about 250 yards away. At 7 o'clock, when he arrived at the school, he was told that the 3 men had been killed. And he then saw the soldiers drag the bodies away from the scene of the crime and wipe up the blood. The civilian informant, Daniel Caballero, recognized Samuel and called over Lieutenant Ordóñez, who was in charge of the operation. And Caballero said, "He's the one we've been looking for. We can't take him away in the helicopter." To which Samuel responded, "If you're planning on killing me, you better think about it carefully. I've already called people about the killings." So Samuel was taken away by helicopter with Raquel Castro, a teacher, and Jorge's compañera, Maria Constanza. They were taken to the Saravena military base. And when Samuel arrived there, Colonel Medina, the commander of the base, when he saw Samuel, he said, "It's good that you saved yourself because you weren't supposed to be brought here alive." And while he was there was a U.S. soldier that attempted to question him there at the base. They were then transferred to the Adrauca City military base. Another U.S. soldier attempted to question him there. And one of the officials at that base said, "The military boot has to be brought down on human rights activists." There was an international outcry because of the killing of the 3 social leaders, and as a result of that, the following month, Lieutenant Ordóñez, the civilian informant Caballero, and 2 soldiers were arrested. Samuel estimates that there were 40 U.S. soldiers at the base in Saravena, another 70 at the base in Adrauca, and he said that they're there because the U.S. wants complete control over oil production in Adrauca. There was a hearing for Samuel's case there in Saravena on August 2nd, and I was able to attend that hearing. There was also a chance for Samuel to spend a little bit of time with his family who's from there. This is his wife, Dalia, their daughter, Daira, who's 10, and their son, Samuel, who's 5. And they have 2 other daughters, Rosny, who's 14, and Dalia, who's 3. Samuel had been taken from the prison in Bogota and transferred to Saravena on July 29th, a couple of days before the trial. And the afternoon that he got there, he was being kept at the police station in Saravena. Colonel Medina, the commander of the military base, came to visit him there in the prison, or in the police station, and Medina said, quote, "Do you still believe that we killed your Union compañeros? I'm always looking out for your wife. We also know where your sisters work." Dalia works in the public hospital there in Saravena, and according to the director of the hospital, he's been pressured by Colonel Medina to dismiss her from the staff. And on September 21st, there were calls made to the school in Adrauquita, where Samuel's sister Omaira and Gladys work. The caller threatened to kill them and said, "Tell the teachers, Gladys and Omaira Morales, that they have 72 hours to abandon the department. Those that are part of Samuel's family are a target of ours and should disappear from Adrauca." There was a call made to the other school where his other sister, Matilde works. The same threat was made against her. And that evening, Omaira's house was called. "We're not playing. You have 72 hours. Everyone that's part of Samuel's family has to disappear from the department of Adrauca." And his sisters are continuing to receive those threats. And I met Colonel Medina, the commander of the military base, when I was in Saravena last year, and he told me that he had spent a year here in the U.S. receiving training at Fort Leavenworth. So the day that I visited Samuel in the prison there in El Modelo, being as how he's such a dangerous man, he's being kept in the maximum security wing of the prison. And for me to be able to enter the prison and visit Samuel, my arms were stamped 6 times and my fingerprints were taken twice. This is Raquel Castro. She's a teacher in a rural school and also a member of the Teachers Union. And she participated in that meeting August 4th as well in Caño Seco. And again, after the 3 men were killed, she was taken away with Samuel, and she's in jail now, or in prison now in Bogota as well. So the hearing on August 2nd in Saravena was also for Raquel. She was there, and I had a chance to talk with her. And she explained also what happened on August 5th. She was in Jorge's house, but she was in another room with Maria Constanza, Jorge's partner. So after the 3 men were killed by the soldiers came into the room where Raquel and Maria Constanza were at, pointed their weapons, their guns into the backs of the 2 women, ordered them to go outside, intending to kill them. And Raquel said what saved their lives was that as they were getting ready to leave, there was a discussion between the soldiers inside the house and those that were outside the house. The ones outside the house did not want the women to be killed. And also at that point in time, there were other people that arrived there, and Raquel said that's what saved her life. So she was taken away with Samuel and imprisoned in Bogota. And she told me that she writes poetry to vent her feelings. And February 18th was the 20th anniversary of when she started teaching, and she spent that day in prison. But she wrote the following on that occasion: "For offering up a declaration of love for life, for publicly denouncing the ferociousness and severity of the armed conflict, for promoting humane values in children and young students, for offering a hand of comfort to the mothers that weep for their children, to the women anguished by the loss of their spouses and compañeros, for being with those that come together and struggle for the dignity of their families, for asking for a little bread for the poor, for defending my peasant and indigenous roots, for not tolerating the injustices, for struggling in the quest for social equality, food, clothing, housing, education, and health as a right for all the children of Colombia and not the privilege of just a few, for not being silent in the face of the extermination of the social movement and of the abuses and human misery. That's why I'm behind bars in prison. But along with me, there are many other people of convictions, dreams, and ideals. We endure the confinement and the squalor of prison because although they've cut our wings, tied our feet and hands, and killed our union, worker, peasant, and indigenous compañeros, we continue to lift up our voices for the life and freedom that we had and that they stole from us. I put away the notepad, hide the pen, close my eyes, and fly." So this very dangerous woman and dangerous man, during the lunch recess from the public hearing, were taken back to the police station, handcuffed and with armed guards. And the person handcuffed to Samuel is Luciano Pinto Duran. He was the president of the Saravena Community Water Company, and he was arrested in January 2004 on charges of rebellion. This is Doña Marina, Alirio's widow, and we met with her when we were in Botalón. This is Erica doing the interpreting of that meeting. Again, Alirio was the president of the Departmental Peasant Association, and so Doña Marina told us that she and Alirio had been married for 22 years and had 3 daughters and a son. And then we went with her to the grave site where Alirio was buried. This photo is by our friend Katie Knight, who was on the delegation with us. So this was Caño Seco on the first anniversary of the killing. This was a banner from the Women's Committee there. It reads that life and death return to earth as natural occurrences. And there were 3,500 people that showed up in Caño Seco that day. And the military had tried to do everything it possibly could to intimidate people and keep them from coming there that day, but still 3,500 people showed up in Caño Seco. And so it really just shows the strength of the social movement there in Arauca. This is Lucy, the wife of Leonel, again, the educational coordinator for the Adult Vocational High School and the treasurer of the United Workers Federation in Arauca. This is Lucy with her two daughters, Paula, who's 12, and Karina, who's 10. This is Alirio's daughter. And then after the speeches, candles were lit, flowers were brought out, and everybody went over for the unveiling of the monument. Doña Marina, Alirio's widow again. And here they are at the unveiling of the monument. Next to Doña Marina is her sister, and to the right of her in the pink is Sonia Lopez, the director of the Joel Sierra Regional Human Rights Committee, who was here in April and spoke from the same spot. So just the only other thing I wanted to share with you to conclude, this is a soldier in the office of the Healthcare Workers Union in Saravena. And on July 18th, the departmental government there in Arauca issued a decree to liquidate the Arauca Departmental Health Institute and to restructure 5 of the 7 public hospitals that were part of the institute. I arrived in Saravena 2 days later on July 20th, and the next morning, I and Sonia and our partner Eduardo were walking to the Human Rights office. And as we were going by the public hospital there in Saravena, we saw that the hospital was completely militarized. So members from the Healthcare Workers Union invited us to go inside the hospital. We did that, and they told us that although that particular hospital was not part of the restructuring, they were concerned that it would be next. And so the union had tried to organize an emergency meeting that morning in the hospital, and in response to that, the hospital was militarized. So the meeting instead was held at the union office. And soldiers like this lieutenant came into the office of the union, and here he is telling me not to take his photo. I couldn't resist. And so later on that day, I went with some of the leaders of the union to the hospital in Fortul, just a little ways south of Saravena. I traveled with Elizabeth, who's the president of the Healthcare Workers Union there in Arauca. She became the president after Jorge's death. This is Carlos, and Carlos worked at the hospital there in Fortul for 27 years. And the day before we were there, he got this dismissal letter, which reads in part, the Arauca Departmental Healthcare Institute has been eliminated, which involves the unilateral termination of your work contract. This is the opportunity to thank you for the service that you gave to the Arauca Departmental Healthcare Institute. And the letter is signed by the liquidator of the institute. Carlos started working there in 1978, and altogether there were 33 workers that were dismissed from the hospital in Fortul. The next day we traveled out to the hospital in Adrauquita, east of Saravena. This is Abigail. She was the head nurse there at the hospital, and she had worked for the Healthcare Institute for 31 years. And the day before, she had gotten her dismissal letter, and she had written down on there the various positions that she had held in the Healthcare Institute over the years, starting in October 11th, 1974, as a nurse's aide. This is Balvina, the health promoter, or a health promoter. She'd worked at the hospital for 19 years. She's responsible for 4 children. Altogether, there were 49 workers that were dismissed from the hospital. So now to wrap things up, this is La Paba River, which flows right outside of Saravena. And the belief is that if you bathe or swim in La Paba, that you'll come back. So the last day that I was there in Saravena, our friends from the social organizations took me out there the afternoon of August 20th. I went for a nice long dip in the river there, and certainly hope that blessing is true, and that I go back there and that I'm able to return there soon. So these are our friends from the social organizations that are in Saravena, and with that, I'll turn it back to Erin to wrap things up for us here.
So this is what we think the solution to the problem is. It's the people that are there resisting every day, spending their entire life working for social justice in Colombia. These are our friends from Arauca, there's Also Hair, the youth organization, there's the Joel Sierra Human Rights Committee with Sonia again, that some of you probably recognize, the Women's Committee as well is there. And every day they're spending fighting and struggling and having fun as well. And we had a lot of fun with them. We tried to learn some of that Hiropo dancing. Didn't quite go very well, but we tried our best anyway, and once again entertained them. So we call this struggle the grassroots globalization. You're all familiar with our current model of globalization, and we refer to that as corporate globalization. And it's time that we take it back, and that the globalization is ours. It's a globalization that's done by the people and no longer by the corporations, and that's what we're demanding it and asking for today. So we wanted to leave you folks with some actions that you can do so you're not just feeling overwhelmed and helpless as you walk out of this room. And there's several things. The work that we do at CAHA is to simply, contact representatives. You do some of that, call people. We have talking points out on the table with scripts, sample letters to the editor. That's a really good way to get the word out because, as you know, these stories are not run in the news. We even try our best to get them in there, and somehow it's just not news around here. So we need to make it news, and we need to write letters to the editor, write our congresspeople, and tell them how we feel. Join CAHA. This is critical. We need people to stand in solidarity with the people that we saw in the last photo. That's the work that we do. They know that we're up here and that we're organizing, and that gives them hope and inspiration to keep going in the struggle. And every person we met with was so incredibly excited that we were there. And they send us emails and say, hey, we're going to do this. Can you guys read a letter of solidarity? Send us down a letter. We'll send them something, letting them know we're with them in solidarity. That's what it means, knowing that they have a support system up here in the States that's fighting this funding that is just killing them in their country. So you can join us, like Beth mentioned. We meet every Wednesday at 7 o'clock at the back of the Peace Center, and everybody is welcome to come. You can go on a delegation to Colombia. You can provide some accompaniment, and we have some resources to help you do that. There's materials on the table. Jay with Witness for Peace is here. He can raise his hand, and Witness for Peace has a schedule of delegations out on the table. We are also trying to do an annual CAHA delegation to Colombia, so if you're interested in that, talk to one of us after the presentation as well, and we can plug you in that way. Finally, we have to overcome our addiction to oil. You heard us mention oil and other resources. That's not just a joke, and it might be a little bit easier now that gas prices are skyrocketing, which I think is great, but let's bike more, let's walk more, let's do more to avoid this addiction. And support your local agriculture and business. Know where you're getting things from. Don't support these horrendous corporations like the ones on our campus, Coke, Nike, any other contracts they're trying to slip in as well. So know what you're buying. I'm going to turn it over to Beth, and she's going to say a couple words. Beth and Derek are, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So stick around. You want the microphone? Sure. Okay. Why don't you stand in front of me? Because it's a block your face. You can come this way. Here's the rest of the microphone box that you have to hold on.
All right, as you probably imagine, this takes money, these presentations. And we're a small nonprofit here in Missoula, and we really rely on our membership base. So we have the membership cards that should have been passed out, and it is $25 for a year membership. So you'll be updated with all of our action alerts and everything. And then it's $35 for a household. And we're also going to be passing a basket around, so any generous contribution you can make, that will really help. Without this money, we won't be able to continue putting on these presentations and doing the work in countries like Colombia.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the accompaniment work that Scott and Erin and Jess have shared with you tonight is really important, because the paramilitaries and the military and the Colombian government, because they're so dependent on the U.S. for money and for military assistance, they're really resistant to engaging in violence and assassinations when U.S. citizens are present. And the only way that we can fund and do our accompaniment work and our solidarity work and our work on international trade issues, as well as our School of the Americas send-off and all the other social, economic, and environmental justice work that we do, it's dependent entirely on memberships and the donations we receive through dues. So you see the yellow cards coming around. If you could please join CAHA so that we can continue this work, that'd be great. Thanks. And now Scott and Jess and Erin will take some questions.
Any questions?
Okay, I'm confused. I think I understand the comments that the military will use on the world's
So it's kind of more or less clear on terms of what the role of the paramilitary is but what's the role of the guerrillas there in Colombia, what's going on with them. Paul here as well, but the civil war there in Colombia has been going on for 41 years now, and there are two large there's two guerrilla groups. There's the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, maybe about 20,000 combatants, and other smaller groups, the National Army of Liberation, the ELN, with maybe about 5,000 combatants. And the FARC is primarily a peasant-based organization, and their platform, I don't have all the points, but they're fighting for, what they say they're fighting for is land reform. It's the control of Colombia's natural resources should be in the hands of the Colombian people as compared to foreign corporations. They don't support, or they're against any further privatization of Colombia's enterprises. And those are, some of their platform anyway. So they're struggling through arms for fundamental change there in Colombia. Their goal is to take power through their weapons. So I think does that help explain in terms of what's going on? So you've got them on one side, and then on the other side, the military and the paramilitary, basically the same thing.
And you think that's not the case? That's not their goal is to
Well, I think, let's see. I've read their platform again. I don't have like all the points down, but in terms of what what's in their platform, what they say they're fighting for, it's certainly, I support the platform. What I don't necessarily support is all their actions. I mean, I believe personally that the people there in Colombia have got the right to decide for themselves how they're going to defend themselves. And so if somebody makes the decision to pick up a gun and fight back, I think that's their individual decision, and I'll respect that. But in terms of some of the tactics used by the guerrillas, like we said at the beginning, about 20 to 25% of the human rights violations are committed by the guerrillas. I mean, it's a lot less than the 75% by the guerrillas or by the paramilitary, but still, it's quite a bit. And so certainly don't support those actions.
I have a comment. Monsanto has a lot of power in their patenting DNA and life forms that came about naturally, but you're also being poisoned on this campus by President Jennison's approval of chemicals that they use on the lawns. And it's not nearly as bad as the fumigation you saw here or that we videotaped in Kansas Rally in Louisiana. The point still remains that these chemicals are everywhere on this campus. When you walk on that lawn, you get it on your shoes, you get it in your car, you bring it home, you've got it on your hair, you've got it in your bed. And Dow Chemical, according to court records from Boulder, Colorado, paid University of Montana researcher Peter Rice from your Division of Biological Sciences over $25,000 to promote Dow Chemical products used by the Forest Service and on this campus. So what's happening there is happening here. It's happening to you. It's just happening at a lower level and more slowly.
To kind of back on that, what they spray over Colombia is Roundup, but 25 times the concentration plus a sticking agent. So call CDC and ask them what happens if you dump 25 gallons of Roundup on you plus napalm, and see if they'll tell you it's okay.
Well, the low-level exposures are oftentimes worse in terms of their ability to destroy the reproductive system or cause prostate cancer. That is Dr. Von Stahl's research. We could call George Dennison, all of us, make a phone call tomorrow and complain about what's happening here, and that would help that situation as well.
Can you talk a little bit about where all this documentation that you take goes, and where do you send it, and maybe a little bit too about if there's any kind of international court that can be brought in or has been brought into this?
Well, I'll just talk a little bit about, mainly we work with trying to pressure, we're talking to people at the U.S. Embassy in Colombia. There's human rights representatives there, so we can talk to them and report the human rights abuses from that standpoint, and also to our senators and encourage them to contact the human rights people at the embassy as well. So those are kind of the main avenues that we go through. Scott also likes to call up the majors of the military there in Colombia himself and let them know that he's paying attention, and that seems to be pretty effective, actually. They pretty much know who Scott is. So that's, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it's, that's helpful.
Just one brief example that I've called down before to Colonel Medina, the commander of the military base there in Saravena, just when various things have happened there. And he actually showed up at that union office that same day as well. And when he got there, he recognized me. He said, "Oh, you're from Montana, right?" I said, "Well, yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, are you worried today? Because it seems like you're always worried when you call." And I responded, "Well, once again, I am worried." But and in terms of the international court stuff, I'm not aware of anything going on. Well, actually, the Inter-American Human Rights Court, there have been cases brought against the Colombian government there by union activists and others, and as a result of that, the Colombian government has had to provide some security measures for some of the union leaders and other social activists that are at risk. So that's been going on. And the other thing the Colombian people have been doing is developing their own, what they refer to as international opinion tribunals. It's sort of like organizing their own tribunal to try, whether it be Coca-Cola or what have you, in terms of what's going on there in Colombia. And there have been various ones carried out. There was one a few years ago about Coca-Cola and its abuses in Colombia. Another one about the bombing in Santo Domingo where 17 people were killed. Occidental Petroleum was implicated in that. And they are looking to establish some kind of like an ongoing tribunal about the abuses of the multinational corporations in Colombia. So looking to form kind of their own alternative justice when the regular justice system doesn't work for them.
I don't know if you know about this area of things in Colombia. I don't, and that's why I'm asking the question. What's your sense, if you have knowledge of this, of the movements within Colombia that are electoral, that have some electoral connections towards mounting an effective opposition that could start to make inroads at the national level, either in the legislature or possibly at the presidential level, as has been happening in a number of other Latin American countries?
Well, the only response I have is I'm not really familiar with it, but I asked William Mendoza, who some of you might remember. He's the president of the Coke Workers in the Coke Workers Union in Barranca, and we said, what are you guys doing? Are you supporting a party? What's going to happen when Uribe comes up for election? And they said, at this time, there wasn't anybody on the radar screen that they knew about, and all they knew is that they weren't going to support Uribe, which is pretty clear. And I don't know if that changed since we left.
Well, one of the difficulties is that there was an effort back in the mid-'80s to form an alternative progressive political party called the Patriotic Union. And that came out of negotiations between the Colombian government and the guerrillas of the FARC. And so a number of the FARC decided to lay down their weapons, enter into the political arena, along with other people, other political parties, and then figures there in Colombia. So they formed this Patriotic Union, which very quickly became a strong party, a lot of backing But then also just as quickly, the elite there in Colombia responded. And over the next several years, there were 3,000 members of the Patriotic Union, including 3 of their presidential candidates that were killed. And so it's made it a little bit difficult to start another alternative political party there in Colombia. There are some, but they don't have the same kind of power as existed before. But there certainly are some really good representatives in the assembly there. And I know that there is an effort to try and get those various sort of smaller parties to come together. There are presidential elections that will be coming up next year. And the goal is to try and get those various small parties to come together and agree on one candidate that they can all back instead of running different ones and splitting the vote that way. So there is kind of a growing effort to try and do that, but it continues to be a fairly difficult situation there. But the mayor Garzón of Bogotá is a leftist mayor and governing the largest city there in the country, and seems to be doing a relatively good job of that. So there's some signs for hope.
I have a question along those lines, and maybe Paul, you might know, but wasn't Uribe barred from running for another term, and wasn't he trying to change the Constitution so that he was allowed to succeed? Do you know
There
about
was,
that?
yeah, the current president Uribe was elected in 2002 for a 4-year term. According to the Colombian Constitution, a president cannot be reelected, but he pushed through an amendment in the National Assembly that was approved by the Assembly to amend the Constitution to allow for presidential reelection. That is before the Constitutional Court of Colombia, and they're actually supposed to be issuing their decision in the next few days about whether or not that he would be able to run for reelection next year.
Have any of our representatives, Baucus or Grieber or Burns, or whoever, been to Colombia? That would be a real interesting thing to have go on your company.
Yeah, I'm not aware that they've been there. Baucus' staff has certainly been there. I talked to his finance and foreign policy person just about a week ago in relation to Luciano's murder. And so she was saying that Baucus' main connection with Colombia is through trade, through promoting so-called free trade there in Colombia. So it sounds like his staff certainly travels down there, but I'm not aware that where he himself has gone down there.
What feeling did you get from the staff or?
Well, she seemed on the human rights thing. She was certainly concerned about Luciano's murder and said that she would bring it up with the Colombians when they next talked in terms of the trade stuff, which would be great. Coming from the senator's office, expressing concern about that. I'm sure that whatever Colombians that she's talking to would then be talking to others and letting them know about that concern. She seemed like she was very much in favor of the free trade agreement that's being negotiated between the U.S., Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador right now, which certainly the situation for small farmers in Colombia right now is very difficult. Competing against even more subsidized U.S. agriculture coming there would really wipe them out. But she thought that was the way to go with these free trade agreements.
She seemed to have, in your opinion, a good understanding of what that agreement was. What it involved.
Well, I think she was fairly knowledgeable about that. We just had a difference of opinion on that. And she seemed pretty knowledgeable about the human rights situation there. She had previously worked for the Center for International Policy in D.C., which has done some really good research on Colombia. And she has been sharing some of that information with Baucus. So it seems like there's some possibility of getting him to change a bit on his position there. Other questions, comments, or critiques?
Maybe I missed this, but I was wondering if there's documentation of the sheer number of murders that have happened overall, including those directly assaulted by fumigations. And if there's any effort to get the people out of the fields when fumigations happen.
Not that, I don't know as far as numbers off the top of my head. I'm just trying to remember, when we were in the one community of Taime, they actually gave us a report of the number of murders that had taken place just in that town in the last few years. And I think since 2001, there had already been like 800 political killings in just that tiny little town of Taime. I'm sure there are numbers out there, but I don't know those. As far as the fumigations, As far as I know, there isn't an effort to get people out of the fields beforehand. It's probably more of an effort to not get them out of the fields before they spray. They're not spraying large, coca plantations like they would want us to think. They're spraying farmers' fields, so they know people are working the fields. There's crops and maybe a couple coca plants interspersed in there, and they're killing everything, and that's the goal. So they're not warning people about it.
I think if you're not clear on this, but I believe like the number of political killings there in Colombia is around like 3,000 a year, somewhere around there. And in terms of the fumigations, when I was there a couple of years ago, the fumigations were going on, and there certainly was not, the only warning is when the helicopters come in. And because each of the spray planes is accompanied by about 3 helicopters. And that was all the warning that was given was, okay, here come the helicopters, followed by the plane, and the plane started going back and forth. And at one time it got to within about half a mile where we were at, just dropping the stuff. And again, very small farms there. And the coca that I saw being grown there was no more than the largest area of land would have been like 7 acres. It was mainly like between about 2 and 7 acres. Food crops right nearby. And you can tell the difference. Coca is this really bright green leaf. You can spot it from a long ways off what it is. And these guys are flying overhead, just dumping everything that's underneath them. And the areas that I've been at, they hit a lot more food crops than they had coca.
In terms of land ownership, if they're trying to move people to obtain the land to build a huge gold mine, say, are they actually trying to gain title to the land, or do people own it? Will they have to be forced to sell from this harassment, or is it a legal procedure, or is it just sheer?
There isn't a legal procedure. They're allowing the gold company to explore almost 3.2 million acres. We're not handing over the land. Is there even really a deed?
Well, there's a couple of things going on, and I don't have the details on this either, but a couple of years ago, the mining laws in Colombia were changed. And there is, like in this area where that Anglo-Ashanti gold mine is looking at, there's a lot of small miners there, like thousands of them, and that's how they sustain themselves, is these small-scale mining operations. So there's a big push, to get those folks off the land so this mining company can then come in. And I think through that reform to the mining laws, it makes it more difficult for the small producers. They would have to go like to the nearby town, pay some kind of fee, paperwork, what have you, to get title to their land. And so there's a lot of obstacles in the way for them doing that, and obviously a large corporation would be much easier for them to come in. And so right now, again, that company their concession is about 3 million acres. I think they've already been given like 90,000 acres to begin explorations there.
I wanted to say what an excellent job you guys did putting that together, and thank you very much. I have a question. Is that Ashanti gold? Is that U.S. owned?
No, it's Canadian
And South African.
Canadian and South African?
There's different charts. From their website, it looked good. I think there's just different points of ownership. And it used to be Anglo Gold and then Ashanti, and they combined.
So is there any documentation of the connection between that gold company and the United States war on the peasantry there? I mean, there must be some journalist or someone who has connected the dots on this.
They're starting to do more investigation there because the area where this is at, the Scimitar River Valley Peasant Association, Miguel, their leader who spoke here last year, that the area where this proposed mine is going to be, it includes the Scimitar River Valley and the southern part of the Department of Bolivar, where that association also works. So they're starting to do more investigation into who exactly is that mine, what are their ties, and so on. But I don't have that information for you right now.
So do the people either farming on the small farms or doing the small mining, do they have title to the land that the grandfather in, or what's the arrangement on that?
I think some of them have gotten title to their small mining claims, but there were some of them as well that were not able to, and there was like a certain deadline. They had to file for that claim by a certain point in time, or else you were out of luck. And so not everybody was able to do that. And the other thing is that that area, which traditionally has been controlled by the guerrillas of the ELN, the National Army of Liberation, that over the last several years, the paramilitary has been going in there, again, with the support of the military. And so there's a lot of pressure just from the paramilitaries to get people to forcibly remove people from that area as well, whether they do or don't have that legal deed.
So they're using the poison to eradicate people.
Certainly to displace them from the areas that are of interest. Yeah.
And Roundup, now studies on Roundup show adverse birth outcomes at exposure rates that are lower than the rates that are used in American agriculture, which is, I think, much lower than what you're describing. So it's not just the immediate effect, but in the case of indigenous people, the reproductive outcomes are diminished.
Yeah, we'll take maybe just these last two questions and then we should probably wrap it up.
I was just wondering if any of these human rights communities have encouraged population civilians to join with FARC and take up arms, to know the numbers of the actual FARC fighting, whether that you expect that to increase in the future, whether or not struggles are going to become more militarized.
So again, whether the human rights abuses have kind of pushed more people to join up with the guerrillas in response?
Yeah.
For my part, I don't know for certain, but I would certainly, my guess would be that, that some people, that has been the result after seeing what's happened to their family members, and they have decided to join up with the FARC, and that is increasing the ranks that way. I don't really have any, I can't say, okay, well, I talked to this person, and here's what he told me in terms of why he or she joined up. But that would just be my gut level response, I would think. And the other thing that's going on there that we really didn't talk about, but that a lot of people mentioned during our meetings, but what they talk about is the worsening or just the deterioration or the degradation of the conflict there, that as it's gone on for the last 41 years, and with all this U.S. military aid being poured in there over the last 5 years, that both sides are really ratcheting things up. And as they do that, the abuses and the violations of human rights really increase as well. And that certainly, it seems to very definitely be the case. There's an increase in the abuses by both sides in the war there.
And just one other thing that we kept hearing when we met people is that it's really confusing. You have people that will go up and join, we met somebody who had known someone who joined the paramilitaries, and then they joined the military, and then they joined the guerrillas. And so you've got people that are just like, there's no other option especially for young males. There's no work, there's no money for school, there's nothing to do, so they're going to find one of these places to go because that's the only options. And so it just perpetuates this cycle, which has been going on for 40 years.
That on the left in Latin America is widely regarded as having lost a lot of its quality, particularly after the absolute disaster that Scott described in the 1980s, which is one of the saddest things that has happened in the progressive history of Latin America, is basically to wipe out some of the best of the people that were in Colombia. Like Scott said, about 3,000 people were killed that were either running for office or involved, including a presidential candidate. Okay? And it just was atrocious. And then after that, it's been widely commented on that the FARC lost a lot of its quality. And there's a lot of dark suffering in the FARC. And I don't know if in your trips to Colombia, you have conversations with your social movement, people that you're interacting with about the FARC. And if you do, I'd be very interested to hear what they say about it. If you just know about them, because I'm very interested in that. And want to make sure that, want to do my best to keep up accurately with what the quality of the FARC is, but I hear a lot of really bad things, but they're secondhand. It's something I read. And then I had a question. If you had, I don't know what kind of access you have had to Bacchus and Weber and Burns, but if you have had conversations with them, I'd be interested and what kind of responses you get from them, and particularly if there's differences between them, or they all seem to sort of see this in the same kind of way.
Well, I can just mention a response that I remember from a meeting with some of Reberg's aides, and basically they say, well, Reberg is going to vote for this because people in Montana are concerned about drugs, and so that's it. And so it's just, for them, it's, it's cut and dry, this is a drug issue, and so we're gonna vote for anything that's working against drugs. If I voted against this, I'd be voting against the war on drugs, and everybody would hate me. And that's kind of the mentality. So it's trying to, get them to understand that this isn't a war on drugs policy at all. And I'm sure Scott has more to add, but another meeting we actually had a chance to meet with, it was one of Senator Baucus's aides in D.C. back in 2002, about 11 people from Montana. We went out to the Colombia mobilization and met with him, met with this woman, Sarah Dudley, and her response was, she was actually really moved and crying, and she actually had a roommate that had gone on a delegation to Colombia, so she really kind of understood this. But she would basically say, well, we're kind of concerned, and Baucus is going to, keep thinking on these issues. And we wanted him to take a leadership position and say, no, he's powerful, he can stand up and he can say no to this and convince other congresspeople that this is wrong and that he's not going to vote for it. But we haven't been able to push him there yet. So there's a little room there. And Scott talks to Baucus a bit. So.
Well, not to Baucus, but to his staff. And it seems like that there is some possibility for a little bit of movement, or a little bit of change in his position with Baucus. That last year there was Senator Byrd offered an amendment. The Bush administration, when Plan Colombia was passed back in 2000, there was a cap, a limit placed on there could only be 400 U.S. troops and 400 what they refer to as contractors. Basically the dying court mercenaries. So 400 troops, 400 mercenaries. Last year the administration wanted to increase that to 800 troops and 600 mercenaries. And Byrd offered an amendment to keep it at just 500 troops, 400 mercenaries, like a slight increase, but not as much as the administration wanted. And actually, Baucus voted for that amendment. And when I talked to his foreign policy person the other day, she said she talked to him quite a bit before that, and that conversation helped convince him to vote for the Byrd amendment. So there's some movement there. Reberg and Burns are just absolutely horrible on Colombia. I'm trying to get a meeting with Reberg just to be able to actually talk directly with him about our experiences. And in terms of the FARC, it's difficult to get, just with the security situation they're in Colombia, you can't sort of ask somebody, so hey, what do you think about the FARC? Not until they've had a few beers, but so it's kind of hard to get that feedback, but it's like listening to some informal conversations. One of the things that I've heard is one of the criticisms has been that viewing the FARC as being very arrogant and very focused on the military part of the war. That in theory they're a political military organization. They're just, not just fighting a war with a political platform and trying to do organizing along the way. But that's been one of the critiques, is just that they're very very much focused on the military aspect of that and not as much the political as was the case previously. And again, a lot of that I think has to do with the last 5 years anyway, with all the $3.2 billion in military aid being pushed into Colombia. They haven't had a whole lot of option but to really focus on the military aspect of what they're doing. But I don't know how much it's kind of just a change in the thinking of the leadership as well, that's okay, we're going to keep going this way because we're going to take power through arms and then we're going to institute these changes. Again, I think that in terms of their platform, which is several years old, but I certainly support the points in the platform, the question of whether or not that, I don't support all the tactics. And just when you're there in Colombia, you're in the countryside, you meet various people. There's the military in places, there's the guerrillas and others. And again, you can't sort of chat, hi, I'm Scott from Montana, I just wanted to find out a little more about the armed struggle. But a couple people that I have talked to just happen to be in a situation where they're there, and so you start talking. And one person who was a little bit further up, I was really impressed with him. He seemed to be a very this odd combination of a very sensitive guy, but obviously they're fighting this war, had been there I think for all of his adult life, and seemed very committed to what he was doing and in there for what seemed to me, all the right reasons. Other people that I've only just talked to, a couple other people I've had a chance to ask them at all about, various questions, the armed struggle, what's going on. And the responses that I got from them were more just kind of, it seemed like they were just giving me what they had been fed by somebody else. And so it didn't really seem like in terms of, being really ideologically clear or sort of understanding the importance of political work and trying to create the alternative in the midst of the armed struggle, that there was much of an understanding around that.
So you don't get much of a sense, or you don't talk about this with, say, the union leaders that you hang out with when you're in private someplace?
Not really, no. And again, just because the security situation there, so it's more just kind of like listening to side conversation. That's the thing that I've got. It's just, they're so focused on the military thing. And again, both guerrilla groups that have carried out selective killings of people that they view as being either government or paramilitary sympathizers, and oftentimes without really, carefully investigating whether that was or wasn't the case.
That's what I hear.
And the other thing is that the FARC recently, the last couple of years, they've killed in a couple of areas. In one spot, I think it was like 20, another was about like 34, the Raspachines, the people that are picking the coca leaves, because in those particular areas, they thought those Raspachines were working for the paramilitaries. And so they just went in there and just, in La Gabata and someplace else, and just blew these guys away. So, obviously, you certainly can't support something like that. And just finally, in terms of how these various groups recruit, one thing we didn't mention with the military, it's not like there's a draft in Colombia where the people that volunteer, like, oh yeah, I want to be a soldier. What happened when I was in Saravena in August, one morning the military just rounded up 150 young men. They just went through the streets and just grabbed people that seemed to be between about like 18 to 20 years old, took them first to the airport for a physical exam there, then took them to the base, there was a psychological exam, and the next day, at the end of the day, they had 36 new recruits. And so again, it's certainly nothing voluntary about that.
We should probably wrap it up here. I want to thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And if you have more questions, you can come down and talk to us. And some folks might get over to the Union Club, so you can also join us there. But thanks a lot for coming.